Hey, welcome to Next Level Method Podcast. I'm Richard Ryerson.
And I'm Matt Lilly.
And we're here to help you take your life to the next level. Let's get started. Well, Miguel Johns is on the show today.
Yeah.
You and I both know him,
yeah,
right?
Of course.
His background is in exercise science. He founded his first company 6 years ago. Young guy.
Yeah, very young.
About to turn 30, right?
Yeah.
And I met him at 1 Million Cups, a little entrepreneur
of course. Yeah, I've been to those.
But he's heavily into studying psychology, peak performance, and entrepreneurship. He's the founder of MMNT and formerly known as KingFit. That's when I met him, right? And as well as the Wichita Flag Football Association. He comes from a long family history of chronic health problems. His dad, I think, is diabetic.
Yep, he is diabetic.
Poverty and substance abuse, and he likes to empower people, do amazing things. And what we talk about here, break generational curses. I don't know. It was just I hadn't talked to him in a long time. It was a really interesting conversation. What are your thoughts on it? I mean, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a very interesting conversation. Kind of several different topics, or several different veins of the same topic, which is how to inspire people, how to help people, right? How to live purposefully, but just really looking at that more globally and saying, from the, what are we doing today? Just smiling and being kind to people to, bigger aspirations. And then I like some of the commonality we got into, like everybody experiences, you gave examples, we gave examples of just everybody experiences fear, anxiety, stress, what do we want to call that?
Negative self-talk, limiting beliefs, all those type of things. Everybody deals with it.
I like you use like the imposter syndrome, right? Yeah. So and you gave the example of Steve Forbes, which people will hear in the podcast as well, which kind of like here's somebody highly, billionaire, highly successful, and yet he still has self-doubt. And you mentioned a couple other people. So yeah, I think it was just a great podcast overall, just to kind of be like, hey, it's okay to be human. We're all human,
right?
And it's not you reference Grant Cardone. I'm sure we're going to get some mail on that, but being real, being authentic, and still having all that stuff going on, and still just showing up, right? Showing up and figuring it out like everyone else is, like we're doing, right? Yeah. So that's what I got. What was your take from the
same thing? I mean, I think it's a theme that is. When people ask me the question, like, well, what have you learned over the last 8 years doing podcasting? Mm-hmm. It's that my biggest aha moment was like, oh, you mean I'm not screwed up? Having these limiting beliefs and stuff that Miguel talks about in this episode about, I'm a positive guy. And then wait a second, when he turned up the volume and you start, and I do that in coaching. I tell people, I was like, when you first turn it up, you're going to be kind of shocked at like
what you hear,
because we do it subconsciously.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever intentionally listened to things that and it's loud and disturbing sometimes when you turn it up.
I spent 30 days in India in an ashram in a silent retreat, and about 2 weeks in, I'm like, shut up. I'm just like, just stop talking, right? I was just so tired of hearing the voice in the head just ramble on and on. I mean, it's exhausting, right? It was just like, and I think, part of it's just getting okay with letting it just ramble, right?
Yeah. I think you're right. And just
letting it be.
You can't get rid of it.
Right.
And maybe that scares some people, but for me, it's kind of relief that we all experience the same thing. So let's just get on with it.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Let's get on with slaying dragons, as I like to say. The dragons are always going to be there.
Right.
So let's just figure out how to be good dragon slayers instead of trying to get rid of the dragons.
That's
how I look at it. No, it's a fun conversation.
It was a very fun conversation.
I really think, particularly if you guys are interested in entrepreneurship, but it really isn't so much about entrepreneurship. It's more about mindset. It really is about how do you deal with, and how do you start looking at life abundantly instead of through one of lack. And he's good at that. And I'm excited to see what goes on with his life.
Yeah.
So go to Next Level Method, guys, and follow us. We got a lot of upcoming events and workshops, and you can learn more about that at nextlevelmethod.com. So please check it out. All right, here's our conversation with Miguel Johns here on Next Level Method. Well, Miguel Johns, so excited to have you on the show. Welcome, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to catch up. We were talking pre-recording. I met Miguel at 1 Million Cups years ago when he was trying to start KingFit, or he's trying to raise money for KingFit.
Right.
And I know I've been following him. We've been friends on Facebook, so I've been kind of following your journey, Miguel. I've always appreciated the entrepreneurial mindset, from both of you, talking to two quality entrepreneurs here, but I've always appreciated the entrepreneurial mindset. But you specifically, Miguel, because you have this kind of this story that I think a lot of people haven't heard, but I think, or at least the area that we want to talk about, you talk about breaking generational curses. And I think that is something that is relevant for today's society, and we don't talk about it a lot. What do you mean by that, by breaking generational curses?
Yeah, well, there's just a few things that I'm sure everybody can notice in their family that really holds them back, that create problems that continue to come around, the same problems over and over again. And in my life and with my family and my wife's as well, we notice those firsthand. We know the things in our family that have created the most pain, and not only our family, but it then spreads into families like ours, our next of kin, so our cousins and our distant relatives, as well as our community. And then on top of that, just the icing on the cake, I grew up in Newton, Kansas, which has its own mindset limiting principles that you have to break out of if you want to leave that town and actually do something with your life. So there's layers to it. I've seen it firsthand in my family. My wife has seen it firsthand in her family. We've seen it in our culture. When I think of people who look like me, being Mexican or Black and being a young male specifically, I see it there, and I see it in my hometown. So that's been something that I've been really diligent on and wanting to break free from, so that I can create a life for myself that's unique and special and enjoyable, and then show others who are like me to do the same.
Yeah, that means a lot. I love it too, because it means a lot to me, because I'm very passionate about this country, what it can provide. But the problem is, a guy like me, sometimes I hear somebody say, or I look at somebody and I'm saying, why aren't they getting themselves out of these situations? How do you respond if you hear someone like me say, hey, just pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get yourself out of it? Is that the right message, or am I missing something? Is there something extra that I need to tell somebody, or at least be empathetic towards when we're talking about this?
That is a really good question. And me and one of my best friends, Collins McDonald, he's from Kansas City, the inner city, Wyandotte type area. And we go back and forth on this quite a bit, because in my family, when I was really little, we didn't have a lot of money. My dad was working third shift. My mom had 4 kids and went back to nursing school. And I remember her studying on her bedroom bed while 4 kids were running around and playing and being chaotic. And now that I'm an adult, I'm trying to imagine that situation.
Right, exactly.
And I'm like, holy cow, like, wow. So in that side of me always thinks, like, if you really want it, you're going to find a way. I watched my mom do it and my dad do it. They both went back to school after having multiple kids, and changed our lives and put us in a better situation. But I also, like my best friend, for example, he is just fully against it. He's just talks a lot about all the circumstances and environmental factors that are at play that can just crush somebody's will and spirit. And if we don't address those things and create a base foundation that really cultivates the will and the spirit and the mind of the individual, then I think a lot of people won't be able to pull themselves up by the bootstrap. And I mean, my thoughts on it are changing all the time. But right now it's tough for, I feel, a certain part of the population for sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
There is so much stuff there. I mean, just so I hear what you're saying, Richard, about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. But then at the same time, it's like we know that it's cliche, birds of a feather flock together. But it's almost more like, if you don't know any different than you were raised, like I don't know any different than I was raised, and other than I've learned, right? I can only be a product of my environment to some degree, because we are affected by it. And so then it's how do we provide environments for people to thrive in that are different than the environment that they grew up in? And I think that, when I say that, that's not based on ethnic class. That's not based on ethnicity, class. That's really just a function of societal norms, and a lot of those societal norms aren't healthy norms for an individual to thrive in. I think it's more the exception than the rule of being mentally balanced and healthy. And I mean, it takes a lot of work, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's not something that you just wake up one day and you're like, gosh, the world's a great place and every day's great. And, it's not, it's in reality, I think most people that seems like they have their, can I use foul language? Can I use exploitative?
Sure.
On the show? It seems like people that have their shit together, they had to go through a lot to be able to get their stuff together, right? Because there's days where I'm like, I don't have a clue some days, right? So, so definitely, I think it does affect specific populations, and I think we all have a history, right?
Yeah, everybody's got a story.
And everybody's got a story. There's just some that are some of those stories and some of that history has just certain elements of it that keep people from maybe exploring or thinking that they even have options, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Right. I mean, if you grew up I've never been an inner city kid. I've never lived in the inner city. Right. So I don't have any idea what that experience is like other than if I watched a movie or something. Right. So I can't relate to that experience, but I've got to think, and I think even Tony Robbins talks about you are the sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. Right. And maybe that he got that from maybe somewhere else. But ultimately, if you're surrounded physically every day with this, whatever it is, that's what you're going to gravitate to. It doesn't matter if that's success or that doesn't matter if that's struggle. Whatever you're surrounded by, it's going to get on you, right? I mean, So then, how do you provide environments for people then to rise up?
Well, that's the challenge, and it's definitely a challenge. I mean, if you think about, I told you at lunch I was talking about that story about Anton Lucky and Miguel. I was reading this book that's getting ready to come out that Elizabeth Koch is writing about this man named Anton Lucky, who inner city youth, grew up in the 90s, actually started the Bloods part in East Dallas, like founded the Bloods part in East Dallas.
Right. Founding
That's
member.
crazy.
And was involved in that whole scene. His father didn't really know his father. Father went to prison. It's the whole cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A fatherless society with mothers working 3 jobs, so there's nobody at home. So the void, the vacuum's filled up by the street. And that becomes the family, and it's just... And then couple that with our culture, which is material, and everybody wants that. It just feeds this gross cycle.
Oh yeah, that the culture is one of the biggest environmental impactors that I've seen for especially minority males, me included. When I was in college, and Matt hit on it really well. The only reason I'm got a positive mindset now is because I went through hell and pretty much destroyed myself for years, and finally realized like something's got to give and something's got to change. Luckily, I was mentally strong enough to get through to the other side and had amazing support around me. But and what I noticed being a college football player and football and sports being my whole life, it was either be a professional athlete, be a professional rapper, or if you wanted to make a lot of money, you're going to be selling drugs and running the gangs. And that was just a common thought amongst football players. It was a nonchalant thing that if they didn't make it to the NFL or become a rapper, that selling drugs was fine because they were going to make good money that way either. Wow. Also, and what I notice now that I think about it a lot more reflecting, those were the only 3 options. Like, why wasn't this an option? Why wasn't that an option? Why wasn't this an option? And it was just that environmental understanding and seeing what's around me, and then the culture pushing information on me of what's important, what's valuable. Both of those combined have put us in a tough, sticky situation.
Right. Well, like in the case with Anton Lucky, who actually, eventually went to prison and in prison finds faith, Muslim faith, but faith nonetheless, and says, and then surrounds himself, going back to that theme of surrounding yourself by certain people, this bishop in East Dallas, and they did this contrarian things that nobody's doing, that the police wasn't doing, that the politicians weren't doing, that the pastors weren't doing. And that's what I appreciate about his story, and I'm interested in what you think about this from a contrarian standpoint, because something has to be done, and and
there's
like
got to be change.
The exposure to the power of entrepreneurship, like you have. I mean, for some reason you got the bug, Miguel, and I'm interested to know why, and how did that happen? At some point, you broke out of that the limiting 3-choice mindset,
right?
Which,
Well, we don't. He may be able to rap, Miguel.
Well, yeah. He still.
You didn't take any of those. I don't know. You didn't really say. You said you had the football career. I didn't hear anything around the rest of that.
Yeah,
but
I can make music too. I produced
I like it.
and recorded. Yeah,
I know. Okay.
Of songs.
All right. I like it.
Yeah, but the point being is that at some point,
Yeah,
you found out
there was other choices.
And I remember that again. Of course, I didn't grow up in the inner city, but I remember. I had a lot of rich friends, and I was, I had just a normal middle class life. But I remember seeing like their fathers who were entrepreneurs, who were franchise owners, and just being exposed to that and saying, "Oh, maybe this is possible."
Yeah,
right.
And when I found entrepreneurship, that honestly, in DECA and in high school, and a teacher pointing me towards entrepreneurship, it was that point I did. Prior to that, I thought, "Oh, I will only be this." Certainly not. I mean, it wasn't as extreme as rapping, football, or drugs, right? But I mean, but it was still I was
parameters around what you were going to be.
Yeah.
But when I got, my point is when I got exposed to entrepreneurship, when I got exposed to real entrepreneurs, and talking to them and going, "You can do this too." You know, like I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, and this is what I've done.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the moment I got exposed to that is when my mindset started to shift. What do you think when you hear me say that?
Yeah, that's I've actually got a story that's very similar. My football career came to a abrupt end my junior year. I tore one hamstring, rushed back, tore the other in a matter of a month and a half or so. And so that pretty much sidelined me for that season and the rest of my career. And so I was going through kind of a dark night of the soul, and sometimes I question if I'm still going through it.
I think we're going to form a club for that.
Yeah, right.
So, there's going to be a Facebook group, right? There's going to be a Facebook group.
Yeah, I enjoyed that for sure. But so I was pretty much depressed, not knowing what I was going to do with my life. My brother-in-law, who's became a really good friend of mine through my wife, of course, but he was in the Navy and was doing really well, and invited me and my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, to Key West. And of course, my first thought is, no way, I'm not going. I'm in a bad situation. I got no money. He offers to pay for my whole trip pretty much, just to get me down there to have some fun. When I'm down there, I'm going to the bar to get my next drink, and there's a guy sitting there, and he's cussing at the TV because the Jets are losing, which I'm a huge fan. And so I'm like, "Oh, you're a big Jets fan?" Blah, blah, blah. Start conversation. He eventually tells me that he has season tickets to the Jets, second row, midfield. And so I'm sitting here thinking, like, this isn't computing. He's in Key West, first of all. He also has Jets season tickets. Who is this guy? What are you doing? Like, those types of questions. And he's like, "Well, I'm an entrepreneur. I own businesses." And for me, growing up in Newton, Kansas, which has a super limited mindset, and me and my brothers talk about this a lot, but when I looked at Walmart and Dillon's, I just thought those were like countrywide owned, government owned organizations. Like you didn't own a Walmart or Dillon's, they were just there.
Right.
And
like the post office,
right, exactly.
Post office, Walmart, Dillon's, right?
Yeah. And all the businesses that had any sort of traffic or growth. And so when I would see a Main Street store that would have like no customers and they sold t-shirts and it seemed like nobody was ever there, I thought that was maybe what business was like for the regular person. And so when this guy starts telling me these things that he does on a regular basis, I was just like, what? This is a whole world I don't even know about. And after that, as soon as I got on the plane, I started going through my social medias and looking at some of my friends who had posted some weird stuff about entrepreneurship, but had kind of caught my eye. Like, what is this they're talking about? Who are these guys? What are they doing? And I reached out to him immediately. One of the guys' name is Greg, and I'll have to send him this podcast because he'll be super pumped. I brought him up. But Greg actually introduced me to entrepreneurship through one of the MLM marketing organizations. Right. So we're going to sell some stuff. We're going to sign some people up. But really, the point's not either of those. It's we're going to create a life for ourselves that's enjoyable, that has freedom, and we're going to do it by working extra hours and building our own thing. And so he really got me started down that path. And what was funny is, around the same time, my other roommate, Zaki, gave me a book called The Strangest Secret. So at the same time that I was learning about entrepreneurship, I also began realizing that I had a voice in my head and that it was thinking thoughts, and those thoughts were not all good. And so I started really going through that whole process. And so when I look back at that, the chances of how it all unfolded are like none, which of course blows my mind today. But I was really fortunate to just happen to come across those things at that time. And that just started a complete transformation for me. How I see the world was completely different after that. How I went about what I was doing was completely different about after that. And what I thought I could achieve was completely different. And so now I'm carrying out those tasks today, and I'm coming up on 30 years old, early 2022, and I'm reflecting and I'm so grateful. The last 10 years, I went down that path and changed directions and invested it, because now I'm feeling like, oh man, let's go. I can do this. I can do whatever.
It's amazing hearing that. I mean, it just validates what I've certainly learned over the last 20 years of the power of influence, right? And like we're influencing whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not.
Right.
And this guy, Greg, was watching a game. The last thing on his mind is influencing a young man into entrepreneurship. That was the farthest thing from his mind. But for whatever reason, that was the initial catalyst or initial spark that triggered something in your emotional and your mental state to like, I got to learn more, right?
Yeah. All he wanted was a drink and for me to probably stop bothering him.
Right, so he could watch the end of the game. So
yeah.
So and we talked just a little bit before the show, but so what do we do with that, right? So we know and I agree 110%, and we're figuring out, at Next Level Method, part of the reason we do the podcast is very much this, is how do we inspire people? How do we expose ourselves and others to people who are successful in different areas of life, so we can kind of bring all those best practices, call it life hacking, call it whatever you want to, but we bring those together and build a community of people around that. But then at a very base level, and we, part of our vision there is to someday have prison programs and have inner city school kid programs, right? So that is the evolution of that process. But when you're looking at what you're doing specifically, Miguel, I mean, I guess how are you seeing it as far as what you can do to impact people that are stuck in that the mindset, really not even stuck, just in the mindset that they grew up in, or the kind of the history that they've inherited here. Yeah,
because I was thinking the exact same thing you were you're articulating there. Because if this one person could do this with one, how do we replicate
right,
it?
Exactly.
Like how do you scale it?
Right.
How do you replicate it, and how do you scale it?
Yeah. So I think that that's a really good question. Step one, of course, that I always think of is, as long as we're living it, we don't know who we're impacting and influencing. So step one is just, if you're passionate about this, if you're listening to this podcast and want to make an immediate impact, you've got to live it. You've got to be what I call the real deal. And it's easy to not be the real deal. And people are always looking for cracks to prove that you're not the real deal, so that they can be comforted knowing like, oh, I knew it was all flawed. Everybody's lame and evil and got different alternative reasons for doing stuff. So number one is we need more people who are the real deal, who are living with integrity, who are doing the hard things, who are waking up early and going for something. So more of that is key in these conversations, the internet and social media and podcasts. I feel like this is just the beginning. So as long as we're diversifying the guests and bringing different perspectives and different faces onto these platforms and showing them in this way like we are doing now, this is a huge start to a wave that I feel like is on the way. What I'm really interested in, I know that we need to help everybody, but I'm really interested in seeing how the generations who are being born with this type of stuff will come out. So if I started watching this podcast, Next Level Methods, when I was 3 years old or 5 years old, then maybe I could have avoided years and decades of self-doubt and self-inflicted pain and those types of things. So I think we're on the right path. And I think one of the stories that pops in my head, there's actually two that are really good. One is what we've discovered through our diabetes care work, which is people listen way more when it's somebody with diabetes who's telling them what to do. Even if the doctors told them the same thing a million times, as soon as my dad hops in and he's cool and has diabetes and lives a good life and he says it, now everybody listens and everybody's ready to take action. And so that's key. It's got to be someone like me when people are watching. And then another story that comes to mind is when Bill Gates first set out to eradicate malaria. And of course, he had the best scientists, the best researchers, the biggest budget in the world. And they made a mistake because they tried to create the most innovative product they could think of, because they're the smartest people with the most money and the most resources. And what they found out was when they got to the ground level, their product didn't work. And what ended up happening is they reversed their process. So instead, they empowered the boots on the ground community to create the products. And then they funded those efforts, and that worked way better. So when I think about it, I'm thinking this whole internet wave and how we live our lives is step one. We start diversifying that. One of my favorite podcasts, you might like Richard, Tom Bilyeu's Impact Theory. He's been bringing on a lot of women of color, men of color, all sorts of different people. And they're just showing that there's infinity ways to do this in your own way. Whether you want to be half hip hop artist, half engineer, part-time teacher, the world now is made for that. So then I think we need the practical steps as well, because we can't just tell people you can be whatever you want, and you can watch Netflix and play video games, because that doesn't go together. So that's another, we got to kick people in the butt too. It's not just all sunshine and roses. There's sacrifice that's involved, and that's a story as old as time. Yeah.
Well, and I think there's a lot of, what's the right word I'm looking for? There's a lot of attraction. I'm thinking of a word of sellability or marketability of selling the grit and the grind, if you will. I think a lot of times, what you said about doing the hard work, I think there's a lot of, I don't know, something around the hero story, attraction to selling it, the kind of the grittiness of doing the work, if that makes sense, right? I think a lot of times we try to avoid that. I say let's dive in and sell that. I mean, it's kind of like the same thing the Marine Corps does when the Marine Corps sells their, be one of the few, one of the proud, right? I mean, you want to be part of something significant, and that significance demands sacrifice. I think I'm attracted to things that demand the grittiness and the sacrifice. I don't know. Maybe I'm weird. Maybe I'm a masochist or something. But does that make sense though?
I think everybody has that inside them. I think it's just been what they're willing to grind for has been so clouded out by what is offered in the culture and what we think is possible. And so I've got two really good friends now who work at KingFit, and I grew up with them, and I've known they were creative masterminds since we were little. I still remember to this day one of them beating me in a story writing contest, and I'm still mad about it. But his story was amazing. I was like, well, wow, this dude is really creative. Anyways, they are willing to do a certain type of work all day, all night, never have to ask them, never have to check on them. But they would have never even discovered that they could do that work without KingFit being started and them going down this path and me being like, yo, crazy idea, check this out. And them just trusting me as a person and being like, we're down for the ride. But seeing that, because if you ask them to do anything else, they would seem like the laziest guys on the planet. But as soon as they aligned with their talent, they were able to develop skills, and they were able to be valued for what they were doing and see the value they are bringing. Now the grind is just part of it. It's enjoyable. I'm grinding through it, and I see the end result, and that feeling, that fulfillment and meaning is so powerful. And cultivating that and helping people feel that and become aware of it, I think would be a massive step, because then one question I get all the time is, don't you get tired of working? And I'm always telling people, like, the easy way to say is it doesn't feel like work. Right. But what does that even mean? Like, people are like, what the heck does that even mean? Like, work is work. I wake up, I don't want to go to work. How do we show them that feeling of fulfillment and meaning and create practices to cultivate that? I think is a good step, because then you can convince people. It's like the energy exercise thing. People are like, I don't want to lose weight. I don't see the progress, blah, blah, blah. But as soon as they exercise once and afterwards they're in a great mood, now you can talk to them about, like, this is what it's really about. Like, I walk every day, so I smile a little bit more, and you feel that. So I think if we can cultivate that, people can feel it firsthand experience, know what it is to really have meaning and fulfillment, then we can get them to grind on things. But of course, that's more complex, easier said than done.
Yeah, it's easy, yeah, right. It's aligning people with their purpose, which, my God, I mean, the vast majority of the population, it's ongoing. I mean, I'm be 53 in November, and I'm still trying to figure out what my
Mm-hmm.
purpose is. It changes and it shifts, right?
Right.
But I mean, but I've come to embrace, and I just was thinking about this with my teenage kids, and like they're still in that mindset of like, you got to do this, you got to have it figured out, and so you can plant the flag and then live life. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way, right? And so I've come to embrace, I'm never going to plant a flag. I've just come to accept that I'm never going to plant a flag. Because if you plant a flag, and if you see somebody plant the flag, what I've seen is better stand back because this person's getting ready for a fall because they become stagnant, you know, or something passes them by. And so to me, it's just a constant evolution of, I think talking to you about this the other day about it's kind of like climbing a mountain that has no peak. And every now and then I stop at a base camp and I celebrate, open up a bottle of champagne, put our arms around each other, celebrate. Look how far we've come. Isn't this great?
Right.
But look how far we got to go tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah.
and I think that's how it's supposed to be. For me, that's how it should be lived. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong.
That's a really good point. And I don't have any teenage kids yet, but I do have some cousins who are just graduating high school, and I'm seeing firsthand that exact experience. Here's the plan. If it doesn't go this way, the world's over.
Exactly.
I'm pretty much out the game. Yeah.
Right.
And I'm like, out the game? You just one semester. You're 19 years old. Yeah.
Right.
So it is that there needs to be a shift there for sure. Understanding that. I think one of my biggest things that I'd love to give back as soon as I turn 30 is if I can just reach a couple thousand 20-year-olds and convince them that they can be poor with no name, no rep, and nothing in their 20s, and it'll be okay.
Right.
Because they can spend the time figuring themselves out and building their skills and developing those skills so that the time they're in their late 20s, those skills are able to generate real revenue for them, whether through a job or as an entrepreneur. That would be a message that I feel could
I
really,
agree with you.
Yeah.
And I think even too, taking opportunities, like I try to get across to my kids is like, you know, they're like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, just do the things that nobody else really wants to do right now and do it well. Do it really well. Do the things that nobody else wants to do, and then you will be sought out.
Oh, right.
And then when the opportunities present themselves, and they will present themselves, and say it's a door, and then say it's like, well, my whole dream was to grow up in Newton and have kids and stay close to my mom and dad. Well, a door opens up and it's a job up in Anchorage, Alaska, and you don't want to go, but take it anyway. You know, particularly when you're young. You know, when you're in your 20s or whatever, and you don't have those responsibilities, you don't have the family, the kids, whatever. Go take it, because that's going to lead to another one, and that's going to lead to others, right? That's what I try to impart to my kids that I wish they would see. But right now, all they see is that they got to have this degree and this. If they don't, they're not going to be successful. I'm like, it drives me crazy. You know, to me, it's what we're talking about here is like, do you look at the world as one of abundance, or do you look at one as one of scarcity?
Right.
And I think the vast majority of what we see in society, people, and even in my own family, is for whatever reason, we're taught a scarcity mindset. I don't know if that's our default as human beings, but it seems like it takes work to get to an abundant mindset. It's like we're pre-programmed or wired to have a scarcity mindset. I don't know if that's culture, society, evolution. I don't know what it is, but do you guys agree with that?
I think it's honestly a combination of all of them.
Right.
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. Now that we're really understanding how vast the universe is and how complex, and science is showing us with shows like Planet Earth and the Cosmos, I think now that we're starting to see some of those things, we're like, oh wow, it really kind of is infinite what's going on here, and there's abundance just right below our feet. And so I feel like as a species, we have to grow up into that. And that's the next stage for us, because the last even couple thousand years since the beginning of time has been all about me, my small tribe, protect it, survive. And now we're at a new point in our stage of growth. And so that's a big message that needs to be spread across is it's abundance. If you're willing to develop the skills, sacrifice, and go out there and test and try and adventure, the resources you need will find you eventually and help you take those next steps. And it's not going to be easy.
No.
They might find you 3 months later than when you wanted them to, but you're in that process and you're going, and it's not stopping anybody else around you from doing their thing either. And that's
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I'm most excited about. Just within my own circle, my brothers are really successful. My wife's friends are really successful, my friends as well. And so we're seeing that we're all taking different paths, and by us all having success in our own way is not taking from any of the other. And that is something that I feel is just not a regular way of thinking today.
It's
Like you
not.
mentioned, yeah.
And once you look at that way, you look at every successful entrepreneur or people that have achieved significant things. They don't have to be entrepreneurs, but people who have achieved significant things that have moved the needle, they all have an abundant mindset.
Mm-hmm.
That is one thing that they work hard at, is eliminating a scarcity mindset. And it's almost like, and everybody uses money as a reason to like, well, I can't do this because I don't have the time or the money. Time I can see, because we all have the same amount.
Yeah.
But I've never heard anybody that's achieved significant things say, "Don't worry about, we'll find the money." They always say that, we'll find the money.
We'll find the money, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just a little thing like that. I mean, I see that stop a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that way one time. Sometimes I still have to fight my way through that. It's like, well, I don't have the resources. And I'm like, wait a second. This idea is, and I do think, I'm curious what you guys think about this. I think that the universe does plant things on you, the angels, the muse, God, whatever. And your obligation is to kind of see that through. Mm-hmm. And if you do the work, and it's not easy, to your point, there will be so many, the resistance will try to stop you, right? It'll try to kill you. It'll tell you, like, who am I? Imposter syndrome. Your spouse will tell you, hey, just focus on this. Don't do that, right? Your best friend will tell you, whoever.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you do the work anyway, and I've talked to a lot of people on Dose of Leadership and everything else, and I've read books, I've seen it, where when people do the work anyway, the universe has to shift. Like it has to move. And when people do the work, things start lining up. I don't know. Have you guys I've experienced that in my own life. Have you guys experienced that in yours? Like if you do the work anyway and you don't know how it's going to end,
right?
But things start to happen.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, you look back. Yeah, you look back, and that's you can never connect the dots until.
Yeah, till you have some marination
years later, right? Before you can look, just like you did, Miguel, with the story about running into the Jets fan in the bar, right? You can look back now. At that moment, you didn't say, "Oh, wait, this is the next step in my life. This is important. I need to buy this guy this drink because he just told." Right? It's not till years later you can look back and go, "Hey, wow, that was actually really important. What happened right there?
That was a pivotal point in my life." Yeah.
And so, yes, I think as we go through those things, or as I've gone through my things, it's like, I have the awareness now that this is leading to something else, but it still doesn't change that it may feel not very great in the moment, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily, I'd say it allows me to, in my own mind, justify the amount of stress or work or turmoil that I'm going through, because I know that there's a greater thing coming. But in the moment, it still is what it is, right? And I think
still sucks.
Right. It still sucks. And I think that's something that I've learned over, decades now, that you just have to get used to, that it's like you're always going to have challenges. It's, can you see them? And we had a guest on not that long ago that was saying that same thing, Cassandra. Mm-hmm. Do you see it as a blessing or a burden? Do you see it as something that's going to help you grow? Do you see it as something that's going to help you get better? Do you see it, in her, she was framing it as basically, do you
stay bitter or do you want to be better?
Better, right? What do I do with that energy, that anxiety, that fear, that anger, that I got to, if I can harness all that, then it's going to drive me forward, or I'm just going to sit here and let it eat me up, or it's going to keep me in my current condition, right? And so, I think that's helping us all remember and understand that on an ongoing basis, right? And so when you're talking about, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no. What I think is people gotta be comfortable really spending time with themselves in these moments, because we like to distract ourselves and scroll on our phone and not really pay attention to how we're thinking. And it actually took me, when I first started entrepreneurship, I just thought I was 100% positive guy. Like, what do you guys talk about negative thoughts? I don't even know what those are. It turns out I just wasn't paying close enough attention.
You didn't turn the volume up. And once you turn the volume up, you realize, holy cow, I'm saying a lot of negative stuff.
Yeah. So I really had to spend the time just quiet, paying attention, whatever's going to come is going to come, with my thoughts. And I would see in difficult situations, I was a lot more naturally negative than I originally understood. And now seeing that, I've decided to approach it a different way, similar to you, Matt, which is if the obstacle's here, yeah, I'm going to take this butt kicking. Yeah, it doesn't feel good. But this means that there's something on the other side that it's trying to keep me from. So that helps me get through it. Yeah. And ride the waves. And so, but it took me the first step of, I had to really notice what I was like, because we always think it's somebody else. But then you start paying attention and see it's natural to, things are not going as fast as you want. They're not going the way you want. And here comes that voice to be like, I knew it. I told you. Why are you wasting your time? Give it up. It's not worth it. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, it's kind of like the old story of the bomber pilot in World War II, and asking, well, how'd you know you're getting close to target? And he's like, I got shot at more. Right. That's kind of like, that's what happens with these goals, right? Yeah. And you get closer, that resistance is going to try to stop you. It's going to try to kill you. It's going to try to but that's when you got to keep going forward, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And for me, some of that process has been also, like during COVID especially, I literally sat down and said, okay, I had, one of my businesses closed completely, like literally had to shut down. It was, a fitness facility. We closed. And then I'm in the nursing home space as well. And it was really bad there, right? And so I had to sit down and just say, I had all the anxiety and all the fear of going, okay, I've built all this stuff and I've got all this stuff and I've got all these, people that, work for these companies. And so I just had to sit down and kind of run through a worst case. I just had to start with me and say, okay, for me, what is this worst case scenario? Because I could tell that I was running from fear, and it was like, I just got to figure out what is the bottom, right? And so I just started penciling out and finding. And once I got to the bottom, and I've heard some other people do this, once I got to the bottom, I said, can I live with that? Is that okay, right? Is it okay if I lose this? Is it okay if I have to file bankruptcy? Is it okay if I lose this? Is it okay if I have to, and at the end of it, I kind of boiled it down. I went, okay, I can survive that, right? If this is bottom, now I've got wife and kids. Before it would have been like, okay, if I can strap on a backpack and I can still travel around a little bit, maybe that's the bottom, and I'm good with that, right? Homeless isn't necessarily that bad then. But now that I have a wife and kids, it was like, well, would I be able to keep my house, right? Can I keep my house? Would I be able to send my kids to school and eat and all? And when I came down to it, I was like, yeah, I'm always going to figure that out, right? But I had to do that, because otherwise I was like, oh gosh, how am I going to do this? How am I going to? And finally it's like, well, if all that goes away, who am I? If all that goes away, who am I? And then what would I do from there? And it was actually fairly liberating, I would say. It was. Yeah. And so you were giving an example.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite exercises to do anytime I'm starting on anything or even thinking through the future of my own business. I always love doing that exercise, and I always recommend people to do it. And that goes back to that, if we could convince every 19-year-old to just put their head down and sacrifice the next 10 years to really find meaning and purpose and develop skills. My rebuttal to them, if they're like, well, I'll get like, is that same exercise of what's the absolute worst that you could happen. And as an entrepreneur, I went through I'm like you, Matt. Right. I don't have any kids, and I have one on the way now, so I'm thinking differently.
Congratulations!
Before I was congratulations! Yeah, thank you. Before I was like, I'll sleep on the streets, and I'll be okay.
right, exactly, right. That park bench
so I'm like, it's not as bad as my mind's making it. Yeah.
Right, yeah. We tend to, we over-dramatize. Yeah,
we certainly take it.
Over-dramatize the downside, definitely.
That whole idea of negative self-talk you were talking about, Miguel, like, oh, what are you talking about? I'm a positive guy and this and that. I can't. That to me over the last 10 years has been liberating. Certainly from doing the show and having these great conversations like this. And Steve Forbes said that to me the first time I interviewed him. I said, well, when does the fear go away? And he laughed at me, and he's like, it never goes away. He goes, what are you talking about? He goes, I was in the shower this morning with total imposter syndrome, about a deal that he was, doing, and that he had, and he's like, if they only knew that I didn't know, and he felt like he was suffering imposter syndrome. And I'm like, wow, the only difference between me and Steve Forbes are our bank account numbers. That's it. Right. And so to me, that was on one side, it's kind of sad of the human condition that we all. And Barbara Corcoran from the Shark Tank said the same thing. She said a deal will be going sideways for her, and she'll resort back to being that girl in 4th grade who never got more than a D, and whose teachers and parents told her she was dumb, and she's like, I'm dumb. What am I doing here? And she still. She says it never goes away, so let's just get used to it, and just and recognize it when it happens, that's not really you. Right. That's the ego talking or something that isn't you. So So,
yeah, that's really comforting to hear, because that's something, that as a young entrepreneur, you start to see it really rise up, and you're like, man. But then as you see it more and more, you listen to people like Richard and Steve Forbes, and you create those exercises of, okay, I notice, here comes the doubt, here comes the fear,
Right.
almost right on time. Just
Right.
when
Yeah,
I
exactly.
expected it.
Very predictable.
And now I've got, I come into my exercise, my mantra, whatever it is, and just kind of break that chain and get right back to work.
How important is mindfulness to you? We talk, I know Matt and I, we've broached this topic in our own conversations. Certainly when we even doing these, it always comes up time and time again, this kind of concept of mindfulness, even spirituality. I mean, where is that?
Yeah.
Where are you at on that spectrum?
That's literally, my life revolves around that, and then everything else is a byproduct, I feel. That is what's on my mind, like, all the time, is human condition, consciousness, thinking, peace, inner peace really being the big one. I was a master at creating non-inner peace for myself in my early 20s. I may have been the best in the country at it, but that drove me to understanding that I had an internal world that I needed to be taking care of and cultivating, that I just paid no attention to, as I'm sure most kids and young adults really don't. But so me today, that's my number one thing. I'm a huge believer that if we can change people's perspectives and their inner experience, that's kind of the next frontier. And that's really the only way we can stop this massive mental health catastrophe that's happening. Is we're just so focused on the external world, and we all know firsthand, better than anybody, that we have an internal world that makes us not happy a lot of the times if we're not taking care of it. And so the fact that we don't even talk about it, that it's a joke, and maybe amongst the 5% or 1%, it's a thing now. So mindfulness is becoming trendy, but the fact that we've ignored that whole infinite universe inside ourselves is, I think that's where the problem starts for a lot of the stuff we're seeing today. And so for me, I'm all in. I'm 100% bought into start on the internal work, start with yourself, carve out time for it. Even if you think it's cutting into stuff you need to be busy around. I'm willing to put my day up against anybody's, and I spend 2 hours on just internal work, and
I love that.
I still get a whole ton done. And so that's something that's really important.
I think you're probably more productive because you do that.
Yes, for sure.
I know when I get intentional about that, I'm certainly in a better space, both productively, both mentally. My outlook, and I've just come to realize, at least for me, that it is a constant battle. I mean, I have to intentionally fight it every single day, and having that mindset of intentionality, of focusing on that. I agree with you. I think that is. I mean, maybe I'm just late to the game, but I mean, I used to think it was so external too. I mean, for the longest time, even that whole time in my Marine Corps, even when I first got out and working in the corporate arena early here in the early 2000s. I mean, I'm in my 30s. And I used to think it was so external. It was all about externally motivating you and getting you and inspiring and fitting, looking the part. And it's just in this last 10 to 15 years that I'm realizing that it is about authenticity, transparency, about vulnerability, and spending most of that time on myself.
Yeah.
Right.
And if I get myself right, if I can't add value to anybody else if I'm not valuing myself. And I think that's where people miss it. Right.
Yeah.
And you got to do that. You've got to do that internal work, to your point, so you can value yourself. Right? Yeah.
And just knowing that you're not alone. That's one of the biggest things, especially for young people. It's like, I'm the only one who's got loads of guilt and shame and embarrassment and jealousy and hatred, which is not true. It's the human condition. It's where we are right now as a species. And it's time to start working on it. But the first step to working on it is like, you're not by yourself. Me too. Even though I'm smiling now, I'm doing good things, like me too. And I may be down in the dumps tomorrow going through the same embarrassment you're going through, and we're in completely different stages of our life. But that internal experience is, we can connect over that. And for all of us, grief and sadness and pain and hatred, it all sucks for all of us. And so, just kind of going into that and growing into that together, I think, could make a big impact.
But for me, it's two-sided. I mean, what you're saying here, what frustrates me to no end, and this is kind of what I'm saying to make. On one end, I think it is a message of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. Like, hey, come on, you've got to, it's a world of abundance. Just let's get on with it. Stop dwelling in the past. Let's move forward. That's part of it. But I think there's a seeking to understand too. And so to me, it's like, if you had a Venn diagram, it is this intensity of will that we're talking about here that you need to have, right? But it's coupled with the humble, teachable spirit. And where those two intersect, that's the sweet spot. And that what you're talking about, Miguel, is that's what we need to be striving for. And that's when you look at our culture, I think, the grievance culture drives me crazy. That's just the one end of it. It's just like, blame this. This is why, I can't, instead of how can I? There's never the conversation of how can I? And then the other side is like, oh, quit your bellyache and just pull yourself out of the bootstraps, blah, blah, blah. There's got to be a seeking to understand that everybody's got a story. Like we were talking, we began this conversation. Everybody's got a story. Try to seek to understand and try to exercise that emotional quotient, that emotional IQ that will allow you to be empathetic and seek to understand. That's the part to me that's missing. Right. And I think if you combine those two, that's where the mindfulness helps you combine those two. And I think, see, I got all the answers. I don't know. Why am I not the president?
You did that snow cone thing before you came back.
That snow cone gave me that
sugar rush. I knew
gave me
the
clarity.
Happen, right? Exactly. I love it.
Man, that might be the way you explain that. You asked if I was going to make a book. That might be the book right there. That the Venn diagram. This is where the magic is.
This is
here.
Right. This is where the magic happens.
And the emotional.
But right. I mean, but when I look at you, Miguel, that's what I see. I mean, when I look at you, Matt, that's what I see. I mean, there's an intensity of will, but at the same time, you're not running around with your hair on fire. You're not being like Grant Cardone. Yeah, I call you out, Grant Cardone. If you're listening to this,
gosh, now we're
in trouble.
Take that. Now we got to get that email. Thanks, Richard.
You're welcome.
All right,
but you know what I mean. That stuff drives me crazy. It's like, or the entrepreneurs that are standing in front of the rented Lambo and the rented house in Malibu, right? We're just inundated with that stuff. But I don't know. I don't know what it was.
It's definitely you're speaking the truth.
Well, and I think back to kind of close the loop there on the whole where we began the conversation is how do we inspire all segments of life to understand that it is about abundance, it is about freedom of choice, that there are other options. No matter where you're at in life, there are other options, and we have to address that all the way up and down the scale. Because we don't rise as a people, we don't rise as a species, as Miguel said earlier, unless we rise together. It's not like I've spent quite a bunch of time in India with monks and studying and different stuff there, and they used to give the example of a balloon, and they said, okay, well, if all of what we consider abundant, affluent people are at the top of the balloon, and all of the people, let's say, in prison and in bad situations are at the bottom of the balloon. How do you get the balloon, if the balloon's floating through the air, how do you get the balloon to go up? You can't, the top just doesn't raise by itself. Right. You have to raise the whole balloon. So you actually, where a lot of the work has to be done is people who don't, back to kind of what we were talking about earlier, people who don't know that they can rise up, because you got to rise that segment of the population up as well. And that's how we get lift. Right? Yeah. That's how the balloon starts to rise. It isn't you just we just don't have a bunch of monks that sit in caves and meditate and somehow that makes humanity a better place. That helps, I'm sure. But ultimately, it's about giving people exposure to options and choices and saying, hey, you do have the right to choose, and there are other choices, and continuing to do stuff like Richard's done with his podcast, do stuff that you're doing, Miguel, like just letting people know, hey, here's where I was at, here's what was going on with me, and this is how, this is some of the choices I made, and those same choices are available to everybody in different ways, I guess I would say.
Yeah. No, I love that. And one of the things that I sometimes laugh about is when I see a lot of like Richard's podcast and the one we're on we're doing right now, and I watch on YouTube and things, and we're always asking, how do we do this? How do we start this change? And in my mind, 1,000 years from now, they're going to look back on these podcasts, and if we do this right, and they're going to be like, they kept asking how they were going to do this change, but they were doing it. So this is it. Yeah. Right. It's happening now. And we're like, and now I'm thinking of my daughter, for example, and she's going to come out into the world just thinking so different, just seeing the world of course she'll go through her stages, and you guys know, because you have kids. So I'm guessing at some point she'll be like, you don't know nothing and all that stuff. But at least the seeds will be planted of you know what, this whole thing, it goes together. Here's kind of the ways of the land. Here's how I do it. Here's what I enjoy and how I've created a life around those things. If you want to do what you enjoy and create your own life around those things, then here's the tools and ways you can do that. So just that message just spreads little by little over time. I think that will have the biggest impact as long as we just keep going, keep working to bring this message to the forefront and keep changing the faces who are talking about it. Diversification. Yep. Everybody needs their person that they can relate to the most.
And Miguel, I guess you've inspired me to say, you know, as we're talking here and as the listeners are listening, I mean, it's not about us on this podcast talking into space and you as a listener listening. It's really about, we all have a voice. We all influence. Right. You said it yourself, Richard, we all influence other people, understanding no matter where we're at in life, we're having an influence on other people. And just allowing ourselves to say, hey, I am, you know, you and I were talking about this at lunch. It's kind of like we go through imposter syndrome ourselves. Where it's like, who are we to be sitting here talking about any of this stuff? And it's like, well, who are we not to be talking about?
Yeah,
right?
That's the question. It's like, who are we not?
Who are we not? Yeah. Who are we not? So I would say everybody who's listening, everybody who's watching this or listening, you have a voice, you have a place, you have the ability to affect other people by just caring, by a smile, by reaching out. This isn't necessarily, Miguel, as you said, we are doing the work. You might as well start allowing ourselves to feel good about doing the work, which isn't necessarily starting a not-for-profit and working with inner city youth or working with the prisons. I mean, that's all great and fine, but ultimately, doesn't it just start, you know, at our families and the people around us?
Changing your little part of the world.
Right, and just being gracious and kind and knowing that we're all struggling to some degree or another. We're all struggling with the same emotions and the same insecurities to just varying different levels and trying to do the best we are. So I guess kindness and love and extending a hand.
Yeah,
I guess,
love
right?
and adding value. I think.
Yeah,
I think the real obligation is we got to make the place better than we found it. I mean, I think that is the universal obligation that we all should be striving for. Right. Make the campsite better than you found it. Right?
Which is literally could be as simple as just being kind, right? To the people around you. I mean, it
doesn't mean getting a cure for cancer or
opening a door or helping somebody with groceries or whatever, right? So
yeah, for sure. And that goes, one of the things that I've been talking about a lot with my youngest brother is this changing your mindset from what can I do for me, even from the achiever standpoint, like how am I going to reach my goals and do my thing, and it's all about me, to how can I help? What's being asked of me? Right. I go out in my day and it's my own little universe, and I'm going to see a whole bunch of people, and little tasks are going to pop up where the universe is calling me to step up and bring value and be helpful. Yep. And so going into the day with that mindset versus I'm going in the day, what am I going to do for myself? Instead, it's what's going to be asked of me today? How can I help today? That's the first step for anybody who wants to make a big impact is mastering that, that giving value, showing up. You're here to make it better than how you found it. Give of yourself, and the gifts will come pouring in.
Every transaction is an opportunity for development and growth and positive impact. Cashier at Quick Trip, to your spouse, to your kids.
Yeah. It's hardest for me to remember that with my spouse.
Well, because we take it for granted, right? Yeah.
Too often.
Well, yeah, this has been such a fun conversation. We're coming up on an hour. I can't believe it. It went quick. Really quick.
Wow.
Did we talk about everything that we wanted to talk about? How can people reach out to you, connect with you? And just learn more about you.
LinkedIn's great. If you want to add me on Facebook, I'll add you. Shoot me a direct message anytime, email at miguel.johns@kingfit.io. I love just having conversations. I'm a business-minded guy, so if you're looking to get started on a business, I'm in those early stages as an entrepreneur and can help guide through some of the first turmoils you'll face as a first-timer. I'm here to help in any way I can.
Love it, Miguel. Thanks for coming on the show. It's just been so much fun, and we look forward to staying in touch. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Next Level Method podcast. If you found some value in this, tell somebody about the show. Tell your friends, tell your spouse, tell your kids, let them know all about Next Level Method. And go to nextlevelmethod.com to learn more and join our community. Thanks for tuning in.